There was a time when I found myself saying things that, without realizing it, were shaping my life in ways I didn't want. Words have power, not just over others, but over ourselves. Every phrase we repeat becomes a seed in the mind, growing thoughts, emotions, and eventually actions. For years, I was planting weeds without even noticing. But here's the truth. Buddhism teaches us that our words reflect our inner world. They are mirrors of what we think and feel. And when those words are careless, negative, or limiting, they can keep us stuck in cycles of frustration and unhappiness. I learned this the hard way. I used to say things that shut doors in my life, phrases that built invisible walls between me and the peace I was searching for. Then, I started paying attention to the teachings of Buddhism, mindfulness, compassion, and responsibility. Slowly, I saw how the words we choose can shift our entire mindset. Today, I want to share 9 things we should never say. These are not just empty phrases to avoid. They are keys to unlocking a life of greater clarity, wisdom, and freedom. If we can let go of these words, we can also let go of the harmful thoughts and patterns that hold us back. Let's explore these together. You'll see how letting go of certain phrases can bring more calm, more connection, and even more happiness into your life. It's not about perfection. It's about noticing the subtle changes in how we speak and how we think. And trust me, even the smallest shifts can make a world of difference. 1. It's not fair. Let me start with a story. There was a time in my life when I caught myself saying this over and over again. It's not fair. Maybe you've said it too. A friend gets an opportunity you wanted. Someone treats you poorly despite your kindness, or life seems to pile obstacles in your path while others seem to glide through. It's hard not to feel frustrated when the world feels unjust. But here's what I've learned. Fairness, as we often see it, is just a mental construct. It's something we impose on the world based on our expectations. Buddhism teaches us that clinging to these expectations is the root of suffering. Life doesn't promise fairness, it only offers what it offers. When we resist this truth, we create unnecessary pain for ourselves. I remember vividly the moment this lesson clicked for me. I had worked hard on a project, poured my heart and energy into it, and someone else took the credit. My initial reaction was anger and resentment. It's not fair, I thought, and in that moment, I wasn't wrong. But the more I replayed the situation in my head, the more I realized that my suffering wasn't coming from the situation itself. It was coming from my refusal to accept it. In Buddhism, we're taught that suffering arises not from what happens to us, but from our attachment to how we think things should be. This is where the concept of dukkha, often translated as suffering, comes into play. Life is full of ups and downs, and clinging to the idea of fairness only tightens the grip of suffering. So what can we do instead? How do we handle those moments when life feels unjust? The first step is to shift our focus. When we stop asking, "Why isn't life fair?" and start asking, "What can I learn from this?" we open the door to growth. That moment of frustration with my project taught me humility. It reminded me to do my work for the sake of the work, not for recognition or reward. I also realized the power of compassion in these moments. Buddhism emphasizes the importance of understanding others' perspectives. The person who took credit for my work, they weren't acting out of malice, but likely out of their own insecurities or struggles. When I looked at the situation through the lens of compassion, my resentment softened. Instead of holding on to the thought, "It's not fair," I started asking, "How can I grow from this?" One of the most powerful Buddhist teachings on this topic comes from the practice of acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean agreeing with or liking everything that happens. It means acknowledging reality as it is, without resistance. When we resist, we suffer. When we accept, we find peace. Let's break this down into practical steps. The next time you catch yourself thinking, "It's not fair," pause. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, 1. Is this thought helping me or harming me? 2. What part of this situation is within my control? 3. How can I respond in a way that reflects my values? You'll find that by focusing on what you can control, you reclaim your power, and by letting go of what you can't control, you free yourself from unnecessary pain. There's another layer to this. When we say, "It's not fair," we're often comparing ourselves to others. We look at someone else's life and think they have it easier, better, or more rewarding. But Buddhism teaches us that comparison is a thief of joy. Everyone is walking their own path, and we can never fully understand their journey. What looks fair or unfair from the outside is often much more complex than we realize. Instead of comparing, focus on gratitude. What is going well in your life right now? What blessings do you have that you might be overlooking? Gratitude shifts our perspective and helps us see life's challenges as opportunities for growth rather than injustices to be resented. I've seen this shift transform not only my own life, but the lives of others I've shared it with. When you stop clinging to the idea of fairness and start embracing the present moment as it is, you unlock a deep well of inner peace. Life may never be fair in the way we imagine, but it can always be meaningful. So the next time you're tempted to say, "It's not fair," remember this. Fairness is a story we tell ourselves. Instead of clinging to that story, write a new one of growth, compassion, and acceptance. 2. I don't have time. How many of us have said this phrase, "I don't have time"? I used to say it all the time. I was juggling work, family, and a million other responsibilities, and it felt like there were never enough hours in the day. But here's the truth I had to face. Saying, "I don't have time," wasn't about my schedule. It was about my priorities. Buddhism teaches us that time is one of the most precious resources we have. Every moment is fleeting, and once it's gone, we can never get it back. When we say, "I don't have time," what we're really saying is, "I'm not making this a priority." And that's okay. What matters is being honest with ourselves about it. I learned this lesson in a humbling way. A friend invited me to a meditation retreat, and my first thought was, "I don't have time for this." I was swamped with work and felt like I couldn't possibly step away. But then I realized something. If I didn't have time for something as important as taking care of my mind, what was I really doing with my life? Buddhism emphasizes mindfulness, being fully present in each moment. When we rush through life saying, "I don't have time," we miss the richness of the present. We become so focused on what's next that we lose sight of what's here. I see this in myself and in others. We fill our days with busyness, but often neglect what truly matters. So how do we break free from this mindset? First, we need to recognize that time is not something we have or don't have. It's something we create. Each day we make choices about how to spend our time. Buddhism teaches us to make those choices mindfully, aligning them with our values. One practice that helped me was keeping a time journal. For 1 week, I wrote down how I spent every hour of the day. It was eye-opening. I realized how much time I was wasting on things that didn't align with my goals or bring me joy. Social media, distractions, overthinking. They were eating up hours without me even noticing. Once I saw where my time was going, I started making changes. I set boundaries around my work hours, scheduled time for meditation and reflection, and prioritized the relationships and activities that mattered most to me. And you know what? I found that I did have time. It just required me to be intentional about how I used it. Another key Buddhist teaching on time is the importance of living in the present moment. When we say, "I don't have time," we're often worrying about the future or regretting the past, but the present is all we ever truly have. When we focus fully on what we're doing right now, we make better use of our time and find more fulfillment in it. Think about this. How often do we say we don't have time for something, only to spend hours on something trivial later? It's not about the hours, it's about what we value. Buddhism reminds us to align our time with our values, so we're not just busy but purposeful. Let's reflect on this together. What are the activities that truly bring meaning and joy to your life? Are you giving those things the time they deserve? What could you let go of to create space for what matters most? Saying, "I don't have time," is often an excuse to avoid facing these questions, but when we're honest with ourselves, we realize that we do have time. It's just a matter of how we choose to spend it. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I don't have time," pause and reflect. Ask yourself, is this truly a priority for me? How can I realign my time with my values? What small changes can I make today to create more space for what matters? When we approach time with mindfulness and intention, we discover that it's not about having more hours, it's about making the hours we have meaningful, and that's a lesson worth living. 3. It's impossible. I used to say this phrase more often than I'd like to admit. Whenever I faced a challenge that seemed too big or too complex, the words would slip out almost instinctively. It's impossible. It was a way to avoid failure, to shield myself from disappointment. But over time, I learned that every time I said, "It's impossible," I was placing a limit on myself that didn't need to exist. Buddhism teaches us about right effort, the idea that challenges are not barriers, but opportunities to grow. When we label something as impossible, we close ourselves off from growth and innovation. In reality, impossibility is often just a reflection of our current mindset, not the true nature of the situation. There's a Buddhist story about a monk who was tasked with moving a massive boulder. He tried pushing it, pulling it, and using tools, but nothing worked. Frustrated, he sat down and thought, "It's impossible." But then he realized he was looking at the problem the wrong way. Instead of focusing on the boulder as an obstacle, he began to see it as a lesson in patience and creativity. He started chipping away at it little by little each day, and eventually the boulder was small enough to move. This story resonated deeply with me. I started to notice that whenever I said, "It's impossible," it was often because I was overwhelmed. I was focusing on the size of the challenge instead of breaking it down into smaller, manageable steps. Here's an example from my own life. I once wanted to learn a new skill, something completely outside my comfort zone. At first, it felt overwhelming. I told myself, "I'm too old to learn this, it's impossible." But then I remembered the Buddhist teaching of impermanence. Everything changes, including our abilities and limitations. Just because something feels impossible now doesn't mean it always will. So I broke the challenge into smaller pieces. I focused on learning just one small part of the skill each day. Slowly but surely, I started to see progress. What once felt impossible became not only possible, but achievable. This is the beauty of embracing challenges instead of labeling them as impossible. Buddhism reminds us that effort, not results, is what matters most. When we focus on the effort, we free ourselves from the fear of failure. Another key Buddhist teaching that helped me is acceptance. When we accept the reality of a challenge without judgment, we can approach it with a calm and open mind. Saying "it's impossible" is often a reaction born from frustration or fear. But when we pause, breathe, and accept the situation as it is, we can see it more clearly. Let me share a practical tip. The next time you catch yourself thinking, "It's impossible," ask yourself, what small step can I take today? Even the tiniest action can create momentum. And remember, the goal isn't to achieve perfection overnight. It's to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Another aspect of impossibility is the fear of failure. Sometimes we label things as impossible because we're afraid to try and fail. But Buddhism teaches us that failure is not something to avoid. It's something to embrace. Each failure is a lesson, a stepping stone on the path to growth. When we let go of the word impossible, we open ourselves to possibilities we never imagined. We stop limiting ourselves and start seeing challenges as opportunities for creativity, resilience, and inner strength. So, the next time you feel tempted to say, "It's impossible," remember this: impossibility is often just a state of mind. Shift your perspective, take small steps, and trust in your ability to grow. You'll be amazed at what you can achieve. 4. It's not my fault. This phrase might feel harmless at first glance, but it carries a heavy weight. I know, because I've said it many times. Whenever something went wrong, my first instinct was to shift the blame. "It's not my fault," I'd say, as if that absolved me of any responsibility. But here's the hard truth I had to learn. Saying, "It's not my fault," might feel comforting in the moment, but it keeps us stuck. Buddhism teaches us about the power of personal responsibility. While it's true that we can't control everything that happens to us, we always have control over how we respond. When we say, "It's not my fault," we give away that power. We place ourselves in the role of a victim, at the mercy of external circumstances, instead of taking charge of our own lives. There's a Buddhist teaching that speaks to this. Your mind is the source of your happiness and suffering. This means that while the external world plays a role in our experiences, the way we interpret and react to those experiences is what truly shapes our reality. Let me share an example from my life. There was a time when I faced a major setback at work. A project I was leading didn't go as planned, and I was quick to point fingers. "It's not my fault," I told myself. "The team didn't follow through." But deep down I knew that I had played a role. I hadn't communicated clearly, and I hadn't addressed issues early on. When I finally stopped saying, "It's not my fault," and started reflecting on what I could have done differently, everything changed. I began to see setbacks as opportunities to learn and grow. Instead of focusing on what others did wrong, I focused on how I could improve. This shift in mindset is rooted in the Buddhist practice of self-awareness. When we take the time to reflect on our own actions and decisions, we gain insight into how we contribute to the situations we face. This isn't about blaming ourselves, it's about empowering ourselves to make positive changes. Buddhism also teaches us about karma, the law of cause and effect. Every action we take creates ripples that shape our experiences. When we say, "It's not my fault," we deny our role in this interconnected web of actions and consequences. But when we take responsibility, we align ourselves with the truth of interdependence and gain the power to create better outcomes. Here's another important lesson. Saying, "It's not my fault," often comes from a place of defensiveness. We fear judgment, criticism, or failure. But Buddhism reminds us that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength. When we acknowledge our mistakes openly and honestly, we build trust with ourselves and others. I've also found that taking responsibility fosters deeper connections with the people around us. When we own our part in a conflict or challenge, we invite others to do the same. This creates a space for understanding, collaboration, and growth. So how do we move away from the habit of saying, It's not my fault. Here are some steps that have helped me. 1. Pause and reflect. Before reacting, take a moment to ask yourself, what role did I play in this situation? 2. Focus on solutions. Instead of dwelling on who's to blame, ask, what can I do to improve this situation? 3. Practice self-compassion. Taking responsibility doesn't mean being hard on yourself. Be kind and patient as you learn and grow. One of the most freeing things I've learned is that taking responsibility doesn't mean you're always at fault. It means you're willing to take ownership of your life and your choices. Buddhism teaches us to embrace challenges as opportunities for growth. When we stop saying, "It's not my fault," and start asking, "What can I learn from this?" we unlock a deeper sense of empowerment and peace. So, the next time you're tempted to say, "It's not my fault," pause. Reflect on how you can take responsibility, not as a burden, but as a path to growth and freedom. You'll find that this simple shift can transform your life in ways you never imagined. 5. I will never change. There was a time in my life when I truly believed I couldn't change. I'd look at certain habits, ways of thinking, or situations and tell myself, "This is just who I am. I will never change." It felt safe, almost comforting, like an excuse to stop trying. But looking back, I see how limiting that mindset was. Every time I said, "I will never change," I built a wall between myself and growth. In Buddhism, one of the core teachings is impermanence, the idea that nothing stays the same. Everything in life is constantly shifting, evolving, and transforming, whether we notice it or not. This includes us. When we say, "I will never change," we're denying one of life's most fundamental truths. The truth is, change is not only possible, it's inevitable. For me, the turning point came when I was struggling with a bad habit. I used to procrastinate on everything, from work to personal goals. Every time I failed to meet a deadline, I'd say, "This is just who I am. I'm not someone who's good at planning." But the more I embraced the Buddhist idea of impermanence, the more I realized that this wasn't who I was. It was just a pattern of behavior I was clinging to. Buddhism teaches us to let go of attachments, including our attachment to fixed ideas about ourselves. When we label ourselves as unchanging, we cling to an identity that keeps us stuck. But when we open ourselves to the possibility of growth, we step into a space of freedom and potential. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, like water shaping a rock over time. One small action, repeated consistently, can create a ripple effect that transforms your life. I started with small steps, setting a timer to work on tasks for just 10 minutes, then gradually increasing it. It wasn't easy, but each tiny effort chipped away at the belief that I couldn't change. The key is to practice right effort, a Buddhist principle that encourages us to take actions aligned with growth and wisdom. Right effort isn't about forcing ourselves to change overnight. It's about showing up every day with intention and patience. It's about focusing on the process, not the outcome. Another powerful Buddhist teaching is mindfulness. When we practice mindfulness, we become aware of our thoughts, feelings, and actions in the present moment. This awareness helps us notice the patterns that hold us back and gives us the space to choose differently. For example, I started noticing the thoughts that triggered my procrastination, like fear of failure or perfectionism, and learned to respond with compassion instead of self-criticism. I want you to know that change is always possible, no matter how deeply ingrained a habit or belief might seem. The next time you catch yourself saying, "I will never change," pause. Ask yourself, is this really true, or is it just a story I'm telling myself? Buddhism reminds us that we are not our past actions or our current struggles. We are dynamic, ever-changing beings with the capacity to grow and transform. By embracing this truth, we free ourselves from the limitations of "I will never change" and step into the endless possibilities of who we can become. 6. I'm always right. I don't think I realized how often I used to think this way. I might not have said it out loud, but in my mind I clung tightly to the belief that I was right. Whether it was in an argument, a decision, or even a casual conversation, I felt this deep need to defend my perspective. But over time, I began to see how harmful this mindset was, not just to my relationships, but to my own growth. Buddhism teaches us about the dangers of ego. The need to always be right comes from a place of attachment to our identity, our opinions, and our sense of self-worth. When we cling to the idea that we're always right, we block ourselves from learning, connecting, and understanding. We close the door to wisdom. There's a teaching from the Buddha that resonates deeply with me. Those who are wise are not rigid in their views. This doesn't mean we abandon our values or beliefs. It means we approach life with an open mind and a willingness to listen. Wisdom isn't about being right, it's about being open. I remember a time when I got into an argument with a close friend. We both had strong opinions about something trivial, and I was so focused on proving my point that I stopped listening to theirs. In my mind, I was right, and that was all that mattered. But as the conversation escalated, I realized something. My need to be right was hurting someone I cared about. Was winning the argument worth damaging our connection? Buddhism teaches us the importance of compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves. When we let go of the need to be right, we create space for understanding and empathy. We stop seeing conversations as battles to win and start seeing them as opportunities to grow closer. One of the practices that helped me shift this mindset is deep listening. When we listen with the intention to understand rather than to respond, we cultivate humility and respect. This practice has transformed the way I approach conversations. Instead of thinking, "How can I prove my point?" I now ask, "What can I learn from this person's perspective?" Another Buddhist teaching that applies here is non-attachment. When we're attached to being right, we tie our self-worth to our opinions. But when we practice non-attachment, we realize that our value doesn't depend on winning arguments or always having the last word. We can let go of the need to be right and embrace the freedom that comes with humility. Let me share something else I've learned. Admitting when we're wrong isn't a weakness, it's a strength. It takes courage to say, "I don't know," or "I might be wrong." But every time we do, we open ourselves to growth. We show others that we're human, and we invite them to do the same. Here's a challenge I encourage you to try. The next time you're in a conversation or disagreement, pause and reflect. Ask yourself, 1. Am I listening to understand or just to respond? 2. What can I learn from this other person's perspective? 3. Is being right more important than preserving this connection? You'll find that letting go of "I'm always right" not only improves your relationships, but also brings a sense of peace and freedom. When we release the need to defend our ego, we create space for curiosity, understanding, and growth. In Buddhism, there's a saying, "To conquer oneself is greater than conquering thousands in battle." Letting go of the need to always be right is one of the ways we conquer ourselves. It's not about giving up or being passive. It's about choosing humility over ego and connection over conflict. So, the next time you feel the urge to prove you're right, take a step back. Ask yourself what truly matters in that moment. You'll find that the freedom of letting go far outweighs the fleeting satisfaction of being right. 7. I don't care. There was a time in my life when I said these words too often, "I don't care." It felt like an easy way to brush things off, to protect myself from hurt or responsibility, but deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I did care. I cared a lot. Saying I don't care was just a shield I used to avoid confronting the discomfort of caring deeply about something or someone. In Buddhism, compassion is one of the central teachings. It reminds us that caring is not a weakness, but a profound strength. To care is to connect, to others, to ourselves, and to the world around us. When we say, I don't care, we're not just closing ourselves off from others. We're closing ourselves off from the opportunity to grow and make a difference. I realized this truth when someone close to me needed help. They were struggling, and instead of stepping up, I told myself, it's not my problem, I don't care. At first, it felt like I was protecting my own peace, but over time, I noticed something strange. The more I distanced myself, the more restless I felt. Buddhism teaches us about interconnection. We are all part of the same web of life. When I ignored their pain, I was ignoring an opportunity to cultivate compassion, and in doing so, I was denying myself a chance to grow. Caring doesn't mean we take on every burden or let others overwhelm us. It means we approach life with mindful compassion. When we care, we acknowledge our shared humanity. We don't have to fix everything, but we can be present, we can listen, we can offer kindness, even in small ways. One of the lessons I learned was that saying I don't care often stems from fear. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of being hurt, fear of failing to make a difference. But Buddhism teaches us to embrace vulnerability with courage. To care is to open ourselves up to both joy and sorrow, and in doing so, we deepen our experience of life. When I began to replace I don't care with how can I help or what can I do in this moment, my perspective shifted. I started to see that caring wasn't a burden, it was a gift. It connected me to the people and the world around me in a way that made life richer and more meaningful. If you find yourself saying, I don't care, I encourage you to pause and reflect. Ask yourself, 1. What am I avoiding by saying this? 2. How would it feel to approach this situation with compassion? 3. What small step can I take to care without overwhelming myself? Buddhism also reminds us that caring starts with ourselves. When we say, I don't care, we might also be neglecting our own needs. Self-compassion is just as important as compassion for others. Take the time to care for yourself, your mind, body, and spirit, and you'll find it easier to extend that care to others. The next time you're tempted to say, I don't care, remember this. Caring isn't about fixing the world. It's about showing up with presence, kindness, and authenticity. It's about embracing the beautiful, messy, interconnected reality of life. And in that, you'll find a depth of peace and purpose that can't be reached by turning away. 8. I will never be happy. I've heard this phrase countless times, from friends, from strangers, and even from my own mind during darker moments. I will never be happy. It's a heavy statement, filled with hopelessness. I know because I've been there. There were times when happiness felt so far out of reach that I convinced myself it wasn't possible. But here's the truth I've come to understand. Happiness isn't something we find. It's something we create. Buddhism teaches us that happiness doesn't come from external circumstances. It comes from within. This was one of the hardest lessons for me to learn because, like many people, I spent years chasing happiness in the wrong places. I thought happiness would come with success, relationships, or possessions. But even when I achieved those things, the happiness was fleeting. Buddhism calls this dukkha, the dissatisfaction we feel when we rely on impermanent things to bring us joy. External circumstances are always changing, and when we tie our happiness to them, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. True happiness, according to Buddhism, comes from cultivating inner peace and contentment. I remember one particular moment when this truth hit me. I was sitting in a quiet park, feeling weighed down by stress and frustration. I kept thinking, I'll never be happy because this and that aren't going right in my life. But then I noticed the sound of the birds, the warmth of the sun on my face, and the gentle breeze. For a moment I let go of my worries and just noticed. And in that moment, I felt a spark of happiness, not because anything in my life had changed, but because I had shifted my perspective. This is what Buddhism teaches us. Happiness isn't about having everything we want. It's about appreciating what we have. It's about being present in the moment and finding joy in life's small, simple experiences. One of the practices that helped me break free from the "I will never be happy" mindset is gratitude. Every day I started writing down 3 things I was grateful for. At first it felt forced, but over time it became natural. I began to notice beauty and blessings I had overlooked before. Gratitude shifted my focus from what was missing to what was abundant. Another key lesson from Buddhism is acceptance. We often tell ourselves, I'll be happy when I get the job, when I find the partner, when life looks the way I want it to. But this kind of thinking keeps happiness perpetually out of reach. When we accept life as it is, without clinging to desires or resisting challenges, we open ourselves to the possibility of finding peace and joy in the present moment. Happiness is not a permanent state. It's a series of moments we can cultivate through mindfulness and intention. When we stop saying, I will never be happy, and start asking, how can I find peace right now? We take the first step toward true contentment. If you're struggling with this, I encourage you to try these practices. 1. Gratitude. Write down 3 things you're thankful for each day, no matter how small. 2. Mindfulness. Take a few minutes to focus on your breath, your senses, or your surroundings. Notice the beauty in the present moment. 3. Compassion. Be kind to yourself. Remind yourself that happiness isn't about perfection, it's about progress and perspective. Buddhism teaches us that happiness is not about escaping pain or avoiding challenges. It's about finding balance, acceptance, and gratitude in the midst of life's ups and downs. When we let go of the belief that happiness is out of reach, we free ourselves to experience the peace and joy that are already within us. So the next time you feel tempted to say, I will never be happy, pause. Take a deep breath. Look around you. Ask yourself what small step you can take to nurture happiness in this moment. You might be surprised by how close it really is. 9. I don't need anyone. There was a time in my life when I believed that independence meant standing alone, relying on no one, and handling everything by myself. I would tell myself, I don't need anyone. It felt empowering at first, like I was protecting myself from disappointment or betrayal, but deep down, it was isolating. The more I repeated those words, the more I closed myself off from the richness of connection and support that life offers. Buddhism teaches us that interconnection is a fundamental truth of existence. None of us exists in isolation. Every breath we take, every bite of food we eat, every comfort we enjoy is the result of countless unseen connections with others. To say, I don't need anyone, is to deny this truth, and in doing so, deny ourselves the fullness of life. I learned this the hard way. There was a time when I was overwhelmed by challenges, but refused to ask for help. I told myself it was a sign of weakness, that I should be strong enough to handle everything on my own. But the weight became too much, and I found myself feeling not strong, but lonely and exhausted. One day, a friend reached out and offered support, and I hesitated. I almost said no, clinging to my pride, but something in me softened, and I allowed myself to accept their kindness. That simple act of letting someone in changed everything. I realized that needing others doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. In Buddhism, there is a concept called Sangha, which means community. It reminds us that we are all interconnected and that our spiritual journey is enriched by walking alongside others. A Sangha is not just about being supported, it's also about giving support. When we connect with others, we create a cycle of giving and receiving that nurtures everyone involved. Saying, "I don't need anyone," often comes from a place of fear of being hurt, disappointed, or vulnerable. But Buddhism teaches us that vulnerability is not something to fear. It is a gateway to deeper connection and understanding. When we open ourselves to others, we open ourselves to growth. Let me share a story that illustrates this. There's a Buddhist parable about a man trying to cross a river. He struggles to swim alone, fighting the current, but he's too weak to make it across. Then, a group of people offers him a hand and helps him build a raft. Together, they cross the river safely. The lesson here is clear. We're not meant to face life's challenges alone. By working together, we find strength and support that we can't achieve by ourselves. Another key teaching in Buddhism is compassion. Compassion isn't just about caring for others, it's about allowing others to care for us too. When we say, "I don't need anyone," we shut the door on the compassion that others want to offer. We deny them the opportunity to give, which is as enriching for them as it is for us. Here's what I've learned. Independence and interdependence are not opposites. You can be strong, capable, and self-reliant while still recognizing the importance of connection. In fact, true strength comes from knowing when to lean on others and when to let them lean on you. If you've ever caught yourself saying, "I don't need anyone," I encourage you to reflect on these questions. 1. Are you saying this out of pride or fear? 2. How might allowing others into your life enrich your journey? 3. How can you balance self-reliance with the beauty of connection? One practice that has helped me is gratitude for connection. Each day I take a moment to acknowledge the people who have contributed to my life, even in small ways. The farmers who grew my food, the teachers who shared their wisdom, the loved ones who stood by me. This practice reminds me that I am never truly alone, even when I feel isolated. Another practice is reciprocity. When I need help, I remind myself that asking for support isn't just for my benefit, it's an opportunity for someone else to practice generosity. Likewise, when I offer help, I see it as a way to honor our shared humanity. Buddhism teaches us that life is like a net, with each of us as a thread woven together. When one thread pulls away, the whole net is affected. But when we strengthen our connections, we create a foundation of support that benefits everyone. So, the next time you feel tempted to say, "I don't need anyone," pause and reflect. What are you truly feeling in that moment? What might you gain by opening yourself to connection? You might find that letting others in doesn't make you weaker, it makes you stronger, more compassionate, and more fully alive. Remember, we are all part of the same web of existence. To need others is not a flaw, it's a reminder of the beauty of being human. Life is full of moments where our words can either uplift us or hold us back. The 9 phrases we've explored today aren't just words, they're reflections of how we think and perceive the world. By letting go of these limiting expressions, we open ourselves to growth, connection, and inner peace. Remember, every word you speak is a seed you plant in your mind and the minds of those around you. Choose words that nurture wisdom, compassion, and clarity. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these phrases do you find yourself saying the most? Or is there another phrase you've stopped saying that has transformed your perspective? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to continue this conversation with you. And if you found value in today's video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join our community of seekers dedicated to living with mindfulness, wisdom, and purpose. Together, we'll continue to learn and grow. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.